I'm at the Red House with Jacon and Issac Rudolph. Thank you guys for coming over.
Absolutely. It's been a while coming. Thanks.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
I learned of you guys from the Triad Business Podcast. That was kind of like my first introduction. Well, not actually my first introduction to you. That was what I just thought it'd be fun to do, like kind of a podcast collab with you guys.
Did you say the Triad Business Podcast?
Sorry, what is your?
Okay, I didn't know if somebody else had said. There's
like,
a lot of
shoot,
Winston. I
someone's
was like, somebody
shouting
talked.
us out.
The Winston-Salem
Business
Business Podcast. You said
Sorry about that.
There might be something called the Triad Business Podcast. So I was like, did somebody feature us?
I'm not sure. I'm on the Triad Podcast Network, and so maybe
I noticed.
that was just
I wanted to ask
in my
about that,
head.
actually. So
yeah. So anyway, sorry for
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
misstating that. But the Winston-Salem Business Podcast,
Yep.
yeah. So that's how I first kind of thought to feature you guys, but then it turned out you and I had met each other previously. As we were just
very
talking
briefly. Very briefly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So I don't want to come across as if I have done my research when really you guys did the research for me and just kind of got me up to speed on everything. But you were just giving me your rundown of your history, sort of as brothers, as entrepreneurs, and as people doing things in the Winston-Salem area. So, you want to just give the audience a quick kind of rundown of that same brief history?
Yeah, sure. So it all started out as a YouTube channel. We had this idea too. We grew up in an amazing childhood. We grew up spending a lot of time outdoors, building things, building, a big fort in our backyard with all the kids in the neighborhood. We build wooden swords and have these, battles that wage across the entire neighborhood. So we started this YouTube channel to make content themed around kind of that sort of stuff in hopes to get kids back outside and get their parents involved, get families doing activities like that outside together. So, we started this YouTube channel, opening social media pages to promote it. We started a website, writing blog posts, all that sort of stuff. And as we were doing that, we were just putting our heart and soul into it, trying to make it to be the highest quality as possible. As we were doing that, the people around us who owned their own businesses, my father-in-law owns his business. We have friends who have like plumbing companies, that sort of thing. They're like, hey, I see what you're doing with all this video production and social media stuff. Can you help me? I have a little project with my business. So, we said yes to a couple logos, said yes to a couple promo videos, helping people with their social. And, we kept saying yes to that sort of stuff. And eventually it just kind of justified becoming its own thing. Mm-hmm. So it started with Fort in the Woods. That became our agency called Siege Engine Creative. And that's where we do all that stuff that we're just talking about for other businesses, among other things maybe we'll get into. And then eventually, so we just this growing love of business and just helping people come up with ideas to promote themselves. We had this idea for this podcast to focus on businesses in Winston. And we just kind of want to become a resource for, aspiring entrepreneurs in Winston. So we're having, the successful business people in Winston come on our show, and we're trying to pick their brains and just ask them good questions, good leading questions. So hopefully the people who want to start their own business or want to grow their own business can pull insight and inspiration from it and hopefully apply it to what they're trying to do.
I think over the last 7-8 years, we've made enough mistakes that were easily avoidable had we talked to the right person. We want to streamline that and try to make it so people could find the right person to talk to in a more efficient manner and save themselves a lot of headache, heartache, money loss, whatever. We just want to be able to help people out.
So the show's been really good for us too, because we're getting a good excuse to talk to these people who are further along than we are, and
which is great.
Ask some questions. And so we're doing the show, we're learning, and hopefully the people that can just kind of listen in on the conversation, they'll be taking away the same things that we are from it. So
I want to elaborate a little bit on Fort in the Woods and why that turned into what it did. Mm-hmm. We were fortunate enough that when we were younger, our mother and father, kicked us out of the house and said, go outside and play, be creative. There's not a lot. I mean, there were rules, but for the most part, we were allowed to experiment and be creative. And we were instilled with an adventurous spirit. And now we're taking that thing that we love, this kind of adventurous creativity, packaging it into something that can be turned into a business, and we're essentially promoting it to other people so that they can dive in and then reap the benefits as well, because it's been instilled in us for a long time, and now it's almost intuitive being creative. It's like making video and telling stories and sharing the joy of what we're doing with people. So when we go to work with a business or do a podcast, we dive into it wholeheartedly. We get to know the people that run it, why they run it, like we want to know their family. Like, why does it matter to them? And that might be something that I think sometimes is missing from business, is that the heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you kind of took it to that place, because that's exactly what I want to unpack a little bit more to start out with. Like, it's interesting that your story has this starting point of the outdoors, of this like kind of familial impact and stuff. It's a value, it sounds like a value that's like contrary to modernity and technology or whatever. It's like being outside and enjoying nature, enjoying time outside. It's interesting that that's like a big part of your starting point. What, like, why do you think that had such an impact, that it's like that it's turned into this thing that you've kept with you in your business story?
Why has like the creativity, like wanting to push that, like get other people to participate in that,
or the outdoor nature of it?
The outdoor nature of it, I think.
I think I think the outdoors, being outside removes all constraint. You're in a fresh, it's a fresh canvas essentially. You don't have constraints of technology or a building. You're essentially in whatever. There's really no constraints. You have materials to work with, and it's very basic. And if you're able to be creative and build something out of that, then, I mean, I guess how to execute in that environment, you can then go into any environment and create. If you're literally given a stick and a rock and you can make something cool out of it, then if you're given some paint, then you could really do something cool. So it's like this great training ground, especially when you're starting out, when you're like, I don't know, you're 10 and 13 and you have a group of guys around you and everybody's like, I'm going to outdo every other guy in the neighborhood and make the coolest thing that I can think of. I mean, we would be standing in our front yard and a kid would come rolling around the corner. You would hear it from like half a mile away. This one guy in the neighborhood, he stripped all the tires off of this aluminum garden cart, got some wood and a piece of pipe, strapped it together, and he made a gigantic 7-foot wide crossbow. And I was standing in my yard and I heard him rumbling down the street. And I was like, what is that noise? He comes tearing around the corner. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. Immediately, what do we have to do? We all get together and we're like, we're going to outdo him. We're going to do something cooler. And it's a continuous race to be more creative and inventive. So you take that mindset and then you go and you build a team and you all work together. You work for a client. It's extremely fun.
So as I was saying right before we got rolling, we would take this stuff that we did as kids and like kind of revisit that idea now that we're adults, and we'd be like, how can we do it bigger or better? So I'll show it to you real quick because YouTube gets rid of the thumbnail once you like scroll back over. But that was one of our video topics.
Oh yeah, that's epic.
Yeah, took like a giant like 3/4 inch, or it's, I guess bigger than that. It was like 1.5 inch PVC pipe that was like 8 feet across and attached it to a log and made a giant crossbow out of it.
And all this stuff is a little wacky. It's a little weird. So we've had hurdles to jump over through this whole process. You have the neighbor that complains, like Dennis the Menace. We were Dennis the Menace.
Yes. Yeah. The neighbor next door to us did not care for our antics. I don't think she.
And you also get business feedback from people. People are like, what are you doing? People make fun of you. Like, it is weird.
I will say from a branding perspective, like this is something I've been big on, is like, getting our message. And also we have these 2 other ventures we're doing, figuring out how they all like kind of coexist and run alongside each other. Has been interesting. But this is something that you've been saying from the beginning. Like, Jacob has always seen the value in, like growing up as kids, like having permission to just be very creative and live out our imagination. Obviously, that mindset has carried over into our career. So now, like, we get to have creativity and making videos and making things for people as our career. So that's been a big thing that he's pushing. Like, it's not just about being outside. It's about, like, it's for him, I think it's always been, not to say that you're like, you don't care about the outdoors part, but like the creativity and like pushing the creativity on parents and kids and saying like, let your kids be creative. That's always been very big for him.
Yeah. I think we were outside because our parents didn't want it.
Yeah. I got my first video game system, I think when I turned 13. I got a PS2 and it was already like, the PS3 was already out when I got my first, like the PS2.
Yeah.
So it's like we had like little computer games and stuff, but we would get like 30 minutes of computer game time a day, something like that. And other than that, it was just like, go find something to do outside. So, but yeah, like that's always been his mindset is, like this stuff, like your kids are outside playing, doing creative things, but that has an application in the real world. If you can exercise that creative muscle and really encourage that on your kids, like it might provide opportunities for them later.
I've got another spin on that. You want to talk about building a resilient team. He and I growing up together with some of the other guys we've worked with, there's been instances where he and I go and take some kayaks and rope them together, grab a bed sheet, and this is us as 16-year-olds, duct taping it to our paddles and sailing out into the Pamlico Sound in North Carolina. And a storm blows up, and his boat starts filling with water, and I'm helping bail his boat out. And we're like, the houses on the horizon are kind of getting tiny, and we're on an adventure, and we weren't necessarily supposed to be out there. Maybe it was stupid and dumb.
So-
but here we are. I'm making sure his boat's not going to sink. The wind's blowing, and the storm blows over, and it was kind of like
It's a metaphor
close call.
for business.
Yeah, but you want to talk about, like, as we get older, I mean, it's a different environment, but at this point, we still have each other's back to a degree. We've pulled each other out of tough spots. You know, I've literally cut him with a machete before accidentally. It
Yes,
wasn't
no,
intentional.
yeah.
Like Dewey Cox.
Yeah, just like, you know,
We were-
accidents happen or whatever, and we've gotten in, like, you know, mock fights, or we've accidentally busted each other up a couple times, and we've been through it. And that definitely helps, I think, on the other side as we've gotten older, working together. Because people are like, how do you work with your brother? I'm like, oh, well, we've already gotten all the...
People ask that question a lot, and it's
Yeah.
like, honestly,
Yeah.
people don't have I guess people have different relationships with their siblings, but like we do get that a lot.
It's one of those cliches people say about
Yeah.
like, don't work with your friends, don't work with your family, you know.
Same thing. So I mentioned a moment ago, my father-in-law owns a business. So before my wife and I got married, and for a time after we got married, we were both working for him. I worked in his warehouse and did deliveries for him, and she worked in the office. And people would say the same thing. They're like, "How do you work? Like, I would drive, if I worked with my wife, it would drive me crazy. We would kill each other." But it's like we never had a problem with it. I loved it. It's like I'd do my deliveries in the morning, try to like rush back so we could have lunch together, and then like. It was never a problem. I
That's
enjoyed
super
it.
cool.
I enjoyed it. Now it's like I kind of hate. It's like that was 2 or 3 years ago. It's like we haven't worked together since, and it's like I don't see her as much.
Yeah.
So
I love it. So, what is the dynamic like with your collaboration? You were talking about Jacob likes creativity.
Mhm.
Where does that put you, and how do you guys like? You can talk about whether it was when you were kids or now.
Yeah.
I wonder what the dynamic is like when you start to approach a project and sort of
question.
try to
That's a
collaborate.
good question.
yeah, that is a good question. I would say it's like I don't know. Usually it works. It works pretty good. I would say like we butt heads sometimes, and sometimes like we get worked up about stuff and have to like wade through things. I would say, tell me if you don't think this is fair. Okay, so if you have like the split between like analytical and creative, I think both of us are both. But maybe if we could split it into percentages, I would say maybe he's like 80% creative, 20% analytical, and I might just be the reverse. Maybe like 70-30, 60-40. 80-20 might be a little strong, but I would say he probably leans a little bit more towards the creative, a little less towards the analytical, and I'd be the opposite. It's like I still like to think of myself as a creative person. I love making videos and whatnot and coming up with goofy ideas. But I know I get a little bit more into the spreadsheets and the math and the tactics and whatnot.
Yeah.
See, I'm the one who says, like, let's build a trebuchet that launches fire across the yard. And he's the one who's like, okay, that's awesome. Let's figure out how much timber we need. Let's figure out those angles and how much it's going to cost. And I'm thinking about those things, but like you said, it's only like 30%. I'm like, let's just do something cool and figure out I want to figure out the money, but let's do it later.
Yeah.
Which can get us in trouble. But I'm also at the same time the one who's going to randomly call somebody up because I'm just kind of like, hey, let's work together. And then we get a big project.
Mm-hmm.
But then he's going to come at it with a much more tactical mindset and play a long game over 4 or 5 months and get a job.
That's the dynamic I hear about in a lot of successful business partnerships, whether they're family or not, is like somebody who seems to be, and it's interesting because I don't know if you guys have been in different roles with other ventures that you've been a part of, but like I noticed as an artist versus as a manager, I used to manage a business or whatever, and like those are 2 different hats for me, but I can do both of them. But like I can't do both of them in one entity. And it seems like in a business, there's often a person who's like responsible for imagining where the business can go, and then another person who's responsible for making sure they get there in a responsible way or whatever.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Normally, you do see that divided up. It's like I think they refer to it's like the visionary, and then like the one who actually can execute it. And again, I think like we kind of bounce back and forth between that. I don't know if we have that. We don't really have that defined.
Yeah,
like
that's cool.
Who's what?
No, because like for instance, you could say sometimes I think I'm like, oh, let's work on Fort in the Woods, or let's really push for a certain type of client. And then you're like, we got to pump the brakes to make sure we have balance. But then we'll flip it, like with the podcast. It's like you want to go full force with the podcast sometimes, and I'm like, we got to dampen it and make sure we pace ourselves.
That's interesting.
It
Yeah.
does totally flip.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. That's how as an artist, it's like I'm the visionary part. But then when I was managing that business, it was like I'm not that. I'm the person who has to like count how many things we've lost or whatever.
See, I see them as very much connected. It's like, this is something I've had a conversation with a friend of mine. Been friends with him since high school for years and years. We've talked back and forth about that. He's a musician, and he says, he's like, I'm not a businessman. I'm not a businessman. It's like, I just want to do my art. But if you want to do something as a living, like, you got to figure out the business side of it. And that's something like we've talked about a lot, where they've been trying to get something off the ground for some time. And I'm like, if you want to be a professional musician, you have to learn to market yourself.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a business skill. It's like, you can't just make what you want to make and expect people to just find it and come to you. It's like, it has to be marketable. It's like, you got to figure out a way to get out in the world. You got to give the people what they want. You don't want to compromise like what you're making, but it's like, at some point, if you want to get paid to do something, you have to be doing something that people want to pay you for. So
that was something when I used to do like the sculpture and stuff downtown. It's like I had to figure out. It's like I used to make a lot of those like cyborg cool robots, the glowing eyes and stuff. And it's like eventually I realized like they were super cool, but no one was going to buy them, or not many people were going to buy them. I had to do the fish and the portraits of people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I was curious. I was watching the episode with Josh. I can't recall his last name. A big beard.
Redbeard?
No, Blackbeard.
Blackbeard. There's Josh Shelton, Josh Ling,
I
Josh Shelton.
The conversation with Josh Shelton. I think you guys were talking a little bit about the arts. And what was your history in the arts in Winston?
Like before what?
Before like Aperture.
Okay.
Like that.
Yeah. So I mean, when I was 19, I started pursuing music. And when I was about 20, about to turn 21, was when I started playing downtown. I started performing first and like started playing at Cranky's back in the day.
Something about a Taco Bell, right?
I did, yeah. Back in before that, I used to play at a Taco Bell in King, the one that's attached to the Exxon, or used to be. Now it's a Hibachi, something like that.
I saw that and I was like, how did you land
something that could even be done? I didn't know
that's super
Taco
cool
Bell
that you leveraged that and went from there to all the other places you've gone. So how did that come about?
Well, my guitarist at the time worked there. And so he was like, he had it in his head that it was a good idea. So he talked to the people that worked there. Actually, this was before then. He had a cousin that worked there.
At the Taco Bell?
At the Taco Bell. So his cousin was like, yeah, y'all should like play here on Tuesday afternoons. It was not a smart idea at all. But
have you seen the meme of the people doing the metal show at
Denny's?
Where he's like,
what the fuck is up, Denny's? Yes, it's exactly that. Only we weren't nearly as enthusiastic. Yeah, so it started at the Taco Bell, playing Tuesday afternoons or something. Then my buddy started working there. So then that was weird. No benefit to doing that. My joke has been like, they didn't pay us, but at least we got to pay full price for food. Because they didn't even give us a discount or anything.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah. So then we started, then I remember there was a coffee shop like in the next mini mall, and we went and started playing there. And for me, that was like, I thought that was a huge fucking deal. I started playing an open mic first, and then they started booking us on weekends. That turned into Cranky's, that turned into the Garage, and that turned into playing all the bars. And then through my relationship, like actually with Tucker Tharp, through my relationship with him, I ended up kind of in a network that landed me a booking agent and resulted in me playing outside of Winston.
That's cool.
So it went from strictly performer, to like this other mentality that whether we talk about it today or on your podcast, the entrepreneurship of the artist is kind of interesting and weird because it's so scattershot and so like, don't know what I'm doing. No such thing as metrics involved. No predictions. It's just like try to find where the money is and ask people for it.
Yeah.
And see how much it'll be.
So I do want to save some of this for our show because like I said, we try to get into like the tactics that people are actually doing to like push their thing forward. So, But yeah, I'm glad you said. So two thoughts come to mind. So either you need to figure out how, if you want to like just do it on your own, either you need to find a way to like split your brain where you're applying, you're maintaining the artistry, but then applying some of it to the business to make it happen. If you just want to do art for the sake of doing art, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to try to make a living at it, you just have to figure it out. So either you need to figure it out on your own, or you need to find somebody willing to help you and like share in the success. So I've heard people say there was actually a fifth member of the Beatles you never hear about, but he was like their manager and he made it happen. Without that fifth guy, and like I don't even know his name. Without that fifth guy, like the Beatles would have never been.
I believe that completely, man. And I'm actually desperate to find somebody to manage my effort right now, because it's
hard to do both.
It's really hard to wear both hats in a single thing. And some people are really great at it. I think the little bit I know about him, I think an artist like Garth Brooks is really great at it. Like he involves himself in every single aspect of what he puts out there in the world.
You know Eric Church?
Oh yeah,
he has a marketing degree.
Really?
Yeah, he went to college for marketing.
Interesting, because interesting.
Yeah, I want to hear. Wait, I want to hear this. What
interesting, because he sure as fuck didn't go for singing. I know that much. I like Eric, actually. I think he stands out to me as a higher quality of artist in mainstream country, but he sings like a sewer rat. He sings like it's always like sneaky sounding like this.
Yeah, you're very right.
That's a good impression. I used to like Eric Church a lot more than I do now. I will say that.
Then you found out too much about him, and then it's just undermined, I think, your perception of him.
Well, I don't know. It's just like maybe I found stuff
You've talked a lot about how country music is very pandering, and I think he definitely panders to the audience.
And then and then knowing that he has a degree in marketing, once you start, are you familiar with Bo Burnham?
Yeah.
You know Bo Burnham?
Oh,
so he has that song about that is called Pandering, where he's like making fun of country artists, and he's just like throwing. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you seen this?
I think so.
So he's just throwing in all the country music cliches and just like, it's so true. It's like they're just I'm not big on.
It comes down to like the art, or your heart, you attach to music because you're like they kind of like relate to me. But if the relation is actually fake and it's just fabricated, then you're like.
That's what Bo Burnham's song is about. It's like it says. I think there was one line where he's like, "I walk and talk like a field hand, or I like walk and dress like a field hand, but the boots I'm wearing cost $3,000, something like that." I'm like, yeah, exactly. It's like you're playing a character that. It's just like modern country. I'm not big on it. I know you're talking. You had Adonis on.
Yeah, I mean,
you guys were talking about this. I'd listened.
I bet you about this every time I can.
Yeah. Well, great. It's like this is my favorite thing to complain about.
We're the same boat for sure.
I hate pop country so much. Like in the 2010s, like what was playing on country radio is decent. There were some annoying songs on there, but it was still mostly okay. But since then, it's just like it's not even country anymore. Now it's pop music with a southern accent.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not even that. If you want good country music, it's like you got to listen to like there's more French stuff. It's like it's becoming less and less underground.
I totally thought you said French.
No, not French.
French country.
No. You don't go to the French. You go to Canada if you want.
Coulter
Wall. Do you know Coulter Wall?
Oh yeah.
Coulter Wall is
he's a badass.
The best country has to offer. He's from Canada.
Yep.
So
indeed.
For Christmas, my wife got me. She's like, I got you something that you didn't know you want, but you'll really like it. So I opened it. It was a record player. So I got this Victrola record player.
Oh hell
and I was like, this is cool. I was like, I don't have any records. And then I opened up the second gift. It was a Coulter Wall album.
Songs of the Plains.
Sick.
On vinyl. I think that was his second album.
He's cool as hell.
He is.
There are some outskirt artists like him, and even like Midland is a weird one because
I don't know.
Dude, they're like
I don't know Midland.
They're cool as shit, and
I'll have to look that up.
They do that song. People say I got a drinking problem. You know that one? That ain't no reason to stop.
If it's playing on country radio, then
I think that one's kind of a hit, but they're interesting because they dress like a mid-90s band and they act kind of like a mid-90s country band. And all their shit sounds kind of throwback to that era. Very clever songwriting and stuff, but they just like party hard. And I think they lean into the fact that they're living out a persona. And that was like what I was going to mention when you were talking about Eric Church. What frustrates me about art in general is this thing where people are insistent that they're living this real culture. Like Brad Paisley comes to mind. He's like, he's the arbiter of like the real culture of being Southern, and he's telling you about it. The mere everyman that like is listening to the radio. He's the one telling you what it means to be Southern.
Yes.
And they're wearing costumes and shit. And they're like come from money, and they are, I mean, I heard Jason Aldean say on the radio one time that he doesn't mow his own yard.
That's another guy I can't stand. It's like
when he first came out, I was like, cool voice, but he is a little annoying.
He had a couple cool songs. I
think the cycle, what happens with these guys is like maybe they do come from an authentic place, some of them, but it's like Luke Bryan, is that the right one I'm thinking of? So it's like when Luke Bryan first hit the scene, like his first one or two albums, they seemed good, but like now I cannot stand his music. It's like,
does it come down to scalability? Is it like the point where
that's what it is?
Too valuable?
Somebody starts, like they start to get some traction, they start to take off, and then some guy in a suit somewhere is like, we can sell this, and then they scoop them up and they repackage it and polish it up, and then they
then you've got,
they generalize it.
But you have people like, now I haven't listened to his music recently, but he lasted quite a while, like Josh Turner. I feel like Josh Turner had a lot of good stuff that lasted for quite a while.
Yeah,
I don't know your opinion on it, but
Josh Turner is an outlier. Like I think he's stayed true to himself somehow. Now he's probably made less money and he's not as big as.
I haven't listened to his stuff probably
like his 8th album he put out. He put out like just a straight gospel album, which was like he had already had like a big career. He's already a big name in country music. He's still playing on the radio, and then he just put out like old gospel.
He's not big front facing.
Well, that's what I was about to say.
You walk down Nashville Strip, you don't see a restaurant with his name.
Exactly.
And he probably could have been that if he had chosen, but he decided to say small. So to kind of go back to like the marketing and the tactics and whatnot, this is true, I think, with when you're trying to grow anything, especially something content based. It's like you start niche, and then as you get a following and people start to, you have some name recognition, you can get away with more and more and more, and then you can broaden out. That's the same thing that's happening with this country stuff. Like Luke Bryan puts out 1 or 2 albums where he's like very country, and then they're like, oh, we can sell this. We got to make you more general and polish you up and make you more palatable to, more of the population.
Yeah. I try not to hold these guys too much accountable to this idea, this notion of authenticity, because they're free to like capitalize on a caricature of Southerners if they want to. It's just, but what we were talking about is kind of that. It's like we have this sense that we're supporting this person within a reality that's like, their reality is that we have this cultural thing in common, that we're like from the South, and that we like know what it means to be to wear Justin boots or something, and like to mow your own yard, little normal life things. And then they get so far apart from that, but still continue to sort of be a symbol for that. And it's like, bro, you got more in common with like fucking, I don't know who,
people
with like
Hollywood.
Our Ariana Grande at this point.
And they end up unintentionally eroding the culture that made them popular in the first place, because then they start having high level of influence.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say like corrupting it, but they do water it down and contaminate it.
Not to mention the perspective that changes so much.
Yeah.
You want to hear my conspiracy theory on this?
Oh, I do.
So I want to say, like, I'm not a very conspiratorial guy, but I like playing with stuff, just like thought experiments, I guess. So anything like conspiratorial that I say like this, I'm not committing to this. I'm not saying I actually think this.
Gotcha.
But it's fun to, what if, it's just fun. So I think I've mentioned this to you before.
I'm just waiting, holding my breath.
Maybe this is he'll tell you, maybe this is one of those things we were talking about before the show. This might be it's not that bad.
I love it.
I was going to say, this might be one of those things we edit out of the show. It's not that bad. It's really not. But my conspiracy about country music is that it's a big ploy to romanticize struggle and like the working class and make them content with their situation. So you get these like rich a-holes like sing about like, working on your tractor and, struggling to put food on the table, and then people listen to it and they're like, yeah, that's me. I feel good about what I'm doing. It's just all a big trick to make you feel content in your struggle.
Well, they make millions.
Yeah, it's a giant psyop to trick the working class into staying where they are.
I think it's a fun conspiracy theory. Absolutely.
No, actually, in all honesty, I don't think that's unreasonable, because people had that happen over the years.
Yeah, it's just propaganda.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And it would be, even if we assume that's true, then we could also, it's not that, okay, so like as an artist, an Americana artist, I could be like, hey man, not me, I'm the real thing. But
they got you.
they got like, I could be
you.
subscribing to that whole machine, you know. I could be just like, oh, emulating what I think is a legitimate expression of culture.
Yep.
You know,
because then you have some artists out there who might not be as popular as they could be, who are kind of throwing, you know, a curveball to that, where they're I think Tyler Childers, right? Like he's talking about the coal mining industry a lot, West Virginia a lot, about the corruption out there. I mean, he's obviously very popular, but he's definitely bringing up some issues.
Yeah,
those guys. I will say, like, I think they call them like outlaw country, like Tyler Childers, Coulter Wall, Cody Jenks is another good one. I want to compare some numbers on Spotify here. Really quick.
oh yeah, this will be interesting.
Tyler Childers is getting up there.
I mean, he's very popular.
7 million monthly listeners. Coulter, I think, is closing in on 2.
I feel good because
3. He's 3.1.
I found Coulter as he was probably like a quarter to halfway up that popularity.
You know, he was like 19 when he put out his first album.
Really?
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, I think he was born in 1996.
He talked about
Josh Turner is 4.3 million.
I mean, these guys are very popular, but
well, I want to look at Luke Bryan now.
Oh, fuck Luke Bryan.
Yeah.
I hate him the most.
8.1 million. But even these guys, if you look at like some of, like you mentioned, like Ariana Grande, like some of these people, Jason Aldean's 8 million.
You know what threw me
compared to who's the most popular?
I saw a video of Willie Nelson pop up my social media feed the other day.
Ariana Grande has 64.3 million monthly listeners on Spotify.
Nothing compared to that.
Like, stuff drives me crazy.
But here's another angle on this. So I found a video of Willie Nelson back when he was probably 45, real young, back in Nashville, wearing a suit.
Yep.
In the Grand Ole Opry in a very proper manner. And that was because that was what the Nashville executives expected back then.
Country was really different.
Yeah, so they wanted him to fit in that very traditional country role. And then eventually Willie was like, I'm done with this. And he kind of went off his own direction.
Yep.
But then that's a whole nother angle of it, because now the kind of more chaotic, edgy, I mean, Nashville's a mess. It's cool to go there and visit, but it's a hot mess. So it's like, I imagine Nashville back when Willie's wearing a suit being very different.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Have you ever been to Nashville?
Yeah, I have.
I'm sure. How could he have not?
I'm just asking. I don't. I haven't done a whole lot of traveling. Like, I don't know.
Man, there's the context in which music exists in society, you know, and like it's really I've thought about them guys a lot. Like, what happened in this way where the counterculture produced like Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard, all these like rough guys at the same time, and they changed like the landscape of music for that amount of time.
Yeah.
You know, and that was just a flash in the pan of many changing landscapes. But if in the greater context, it's like for a time period, it was the outlaw shit and like the anti-corporate look that people loved. And then like the 80s happened and it was a different vibe in country, especially when country was kind of in a dip of popularity. But then the 90s came around and like a whole different like subculture became the mainstream in country. And this happens all the time.
I feel like the 2000s came through and just like washed all the grit out of it.
What I don't understand is how, when like back then we didn't really have other means like we do now for like alternative radio and shit. So now I don't understand how the industry remains separate from what I think of as like the true music fans, kind of what they dictate. I think of Tyler Childers and Coulter Wall as products of real fan sort of selection.
Like
grassroots movement compared to somebody like Luke Bryan, where they're just like, this is the new piece of shit that we're telling you to like.
We can sell this or package it up.
Okay.
That's a good way of saying it. This is what drives me crazy. Like artists like Ariana Grande, Taylor Swift, like it's just what you're being force fed, or like Ed Sheeran. Can't stand Ed Sheeran. Not because it's like it's not really bad music, but it's like, to me, Ed Sheeran is like one of the most boring musicians out there. It's like I can't even articulate. It's just like it's so nondescript. There's just nothing special or unique about his music. But he's like one of the biggest stars out there, and I think people like him because that's what they're that's what they're handed. It's
the-
not. It's the opposite of grassroots.
I
Like
think it's deeper than that though, because I think where we have Culture Wall and Tyler Childers, I think those guys are holding a standard for themselves. And I think they are actually choosing to not go a certain to a certain place. I think some of these other artists are allowing themselves to leverage things like psychology and science. Because when you look at the way that a lot of these songs are designed, they're made to hold the attention, evoke feelings, and it's down to the science of the beat in the background, the
How
tone
long
of
an
the note.
intro is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just like marketing is. Like we know.
Look at that listener count. Does that just like
Almost 80
piss you
million.
off? 79.2 million listeners listen to Ed Sheeran every
The
single
world's a
month.
huge place, but what I'm getting at is
But Tyler Childers has 7.
if they're leveraging
No, it's
stuff
exactly
like
what we're talking
that,
about. Like
science.
it's marketing. It's like it's turning it into business. So we're talking about the spectrum of like art versus business, right? So it's like I think the people that we're
And the
saying we
science,
like,
yeah.
it's more leaning towards the art, and then we do the business that we need to do to make it sustainable. These guys have completely abandoned the art, and it's all business.
which is
It's
taking it towards like machine. It's
yes, well that's what I'm saying, and that's why it's frustrating. And like I like if Ed Sheeran was, this is kind of like it's a I guess circular reasoning, but it's like if Ed Sheeran was not mega famous, if he had the kind of numbers that like Culture Wall or Tyler Childers has, nobody would care. I don't know how it happens, like how it comes first, but the people like Ed Sheeran because other people like Ed Sheeran.
Okay, so do you want to talk?
I don't know if I'm articulating that properly.
Okay, if you can look at how like someone can go from being like original and true to their culture and stuff, and then moving to this machine of marketing, this marketing mechanism, then what's the next step? What's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years? And if we go into this conversation, we're going to give away a little bit of our secret unfair advantage in the marketing world. Do we want to do that? I think it's fine. Everybody knows about it. Oh,
yeah, they don't.
They're finding out about it. But you can start talking about the conversation of where is music going to go in the next 5 to 10 years using artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Because that as a marketing tool.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, plugging into the conspiracy aspect, that's an interesting thing to ponder too. Like what happens when something like music, when something like an industry like art becomes that mega huge of an industry? You do wonder sometimes, like there's bound to be people. I don't want to come across as too conspiratorial either, but there's bound to be people who,
Let's do it. It's your show.
when they like to use mediums like art and like music to influence culture, there's bound to be people doing that with mainstream music. And when somebody has 70 million plays, it seems to indicate that the industry is like prioritizing them above somebody like Tyler Childers.
Yeah.
If anybody in a position of authority or their life goal has been to maybe, let's say, positively impact large amounts of people, and in their mind they have something that's going to make a positive impact, why wouldn't they leverage every tool available to them, whether that's visual, audio, or whatever it might be? Why wouldn't they?
Well, I don't even think it has to go. I think you're right. It probably often does go there, but I don't think it necessarily has to. I think it can be just as plain and simple as just money, right?
Sure.
So it's like, kind of weird, unique flavors of ice cream are never going to sell more than, vanilla.
Right.
Just plain vanilla ice cream. It's like once you have the ability to push something out, we were talking about like staying niche to kind of get started. Once you're way past that, and you have the ability to reach lots and lots of people, like being general and being palatable to more and more people, is like, it is better. You're gonna make more money faster. I think that's all it is. They just take these artists and are like, okay, you're saying that's turning off this whole subset of people. Stop saying that. Say this instead, because the show Community.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you remember? Do you know the guy who he started out as Subway? He was like this corporate entity in like human form. Do you know? I'm very familiar with the show.
I have no idea what you're talking about. So I'm so confused. I'll just let you go.
This is my wife and I have like our comfort shows. I was like, I don't like watching new shows a lot. It's like if I find something that I really like The Office or Parks and Rec or Community, like we just rewatch. I've probably watched Community like 5 or 6 times all the way through. But there's the school adds a little kiosk, and they add a Subway shop, and they like Subway as a corporation figures out that they can like make a human like a corporate entity. So there's a character named Subway, and he's like he has to live out all of the standards or the beliefs of the corporation. So but he disappears at one point, and he comes back, and he's doing the same thing for Honda. So it's like really it's really clever marketing on like the actual show's part. Like, I'm pretty sure it's the most what do they call it? It's like product
placement.
It's like, Michael Bay does this with like Mountain Dew and like GM and all this, but it's like it's the most clever product placement I've ever seen, because like they just make a big joke out of it. It's great. But
I see.
But he's representing Honda in a much later episode, and the girl he's dating says something bad about the movie Avatar. And he's like, no, don't. And she's like, we have to like Avatar. He's like, yeah, of course. We're not monsters. We like the things that most people like. We love Avatar. It's like, that's with these musicians. That thing. It's like, yeah, don't say that. You're turning off a whole set. We like the things that most people like, because we don't want to push anybody away. We want to make lots of money.
Yeah.
With your face.
This is a conversation we've had about our marketing business. It's like, how do we brand ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
Are we just acceptable to all, or should we? I'm not saying ostracize a particular subset, but should we be a little bit more? Should we identify a little bit more with a particular crowd?
What do you think?
I think we are leaning towards, we want to be acceptable and attractive to people within a certain industry.
Not to say it's like
region.
You don't want to be offensive. You don't want to say something to like tear somebody down, or like you don't want to be offensive to anybody, but you can choose to do or say things that like cause you to typically this is always like a double-edged sword, right? It's like you can say something that you really makes you identify with some people, and then other people aren't going to like like in terms of like, religion or politics or likes, dislikes, whatever. Yeah, this is a double-edged sword. It's like you can, but for every person that you push away with, like, speaking in generalities, like, unless I came up with a specific example, it's hard to just kind of like speak about it generally. But it's like,
I have a good example. I think, we were talking about, this marketing strategy of, if you have 20% of your clients are the most high value clients, right? And you want to whittle down to using the same approaches that you did to acquire those 20%. You find out what is the common factor. What we have identified so far as our common factor is all of our clients really like the idea, oddly enough, behind Fort in the Woods, which has a certain set of values at its core.
Yeah.
But in our region, our neighbors and our, people around us really identify with it. And it's not exactly connected, but this idea of being outside, raising your kids to be, self-sufficient and adventurous and creative, and having something, resemblant of a moral compass is striking with people, and they like it. And then what they do, they watch the videos, they get to know us, and then they go and they're like, hey, why don't we work together? So I think if we leaned into that, I'm not saying to, a crazy extent, but if we embrace that, I think people are going to identify with it even more and feel comfortable with us.
Do you guys do any research or whatever on like brand personality?
As far as in what regard?
How do you mean, like?
Yeah, I mean, it's that some of what you're talking about sounds like to me like that's what we're getting close to talking about. I think of it in terms of like, there's a couple of people who use different things, but a common thing I've seen is there's a personality wheel out there for marketing purposes. And what they do is like kind of identify a key desire that a certain demographic might want, a personality might want.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
it's broken into like a couple different archetypes. So like what you were just talking about, the adventurer, like we can get really narrow into like people who see a brand that represents adventure to them. They are seeking, if I'm correct, I think they're seeking paradise. And so that's a value you have in common, is like looking for appreciating this paradisal sort of existence. And you guys have been talking about, love and outdoors and stuff. That's probably part of what that is,
Yeah, I think what they call this like identifying your like customer avatar. It's like you're
yeah.
trying to like, which I want to talk about this in relation to like R2 podcasts. I want to come back to this. I want to make sure we don't. Because
Yeah.
I told you on Instagram, I was like, make a note of like the sponsorship thing because you mentioned like
That's
trying to
right.
get sponsors. So it's like I wanted to talk about this. But in regards to like Fort in the Woods or Siege Engine, I think the way to concisely say the thought about the double-edged sword thing, it's like you could do something and that might chase one person away, but it might make another person identify with you even stronger.
Exactly.
You just got to make those. You just got to make
that's
those
a good way to say
choices.
it.
So yeah, we've had these debates as far as some of our content, which it's I mean it's okay to talk. So my background is in like summer camp. It was like in college and a little bit after I was working at an outdoor summer camp, and we did like canoeing and archery. And one of the things at this particular camp they offered was like riflery, is they would do like little 22s for the kids, and I would teach that class. So we've talked about that on Fort in the Woods, or like, do we want to do any content? Like, do we even want to touch that? Do we want to do any content with
Right.
guns? Because that's polarizing. It's like people have really strong opinions on that both ways. So do we want to do content on guns, and we're going to push away this whole subset of people? But on the other hand of that, it's like if we do, some very, basic videos on gun safety, that might make another subset of people identify even more. So it's like, yeah, I mean that's basically the summarization of that debate. It's like, which do you do? But going back to like the niching down thing, I've heard people say, and this is with like any type of content, you want to identify that customer avatar so tightly that when somebody finds your show or your YouTube channel or whatever it is you do, they're like, there's somebody else out there that thinks just like me. Like, and they get excited and they're like, oh, I've had this in my head so long and I've never found the way to articulate it, and they just did. Like, that's what you want to do. You want to have somebody identify it super strongly, and that's what we're trying to do with Fort in the Woods. We want like a very particular type of person who's trying to raise their kids in a particular type of way, and be like, I can't believe this has been out there all this time and I didn't know about it. I'm just not finding it.
Yep.
Also
Like,
with the podcast,
Yeah.
it should be the same thing. It's
Yeah,
this
exactly.
community that someone wishes they had.
Mhm.
They're gonna stumble upon it and like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
I needed this.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely, man. I mean, so when I started, you mentioned we had talked about the fact that I think you used the word controversial when we were talking about like our two different podcasts and what we would talk about and stuff. And this one is on the more controversial side because I lean into certain of those divisive subjects. And likewise, it was sort of like I've been so terrified of doing this, especially because a few years back as a musician, I think I sacrificed some stuff when I started being outspoken about like my religious views or lack thereof. I had a spell where I was like, I really had it in for religion for a while and wanted to be like negative toward it. And then I saw that society did the same thing, and then I just learned more. I changed my perspective. And so I was like, okay, I'm changing back, and that's fine. But I think I lost some support from some people over those years, And then now I'm in this thing talking about all sorts of controversial stuff. And, it was funny. I met this person. They'll never know about this, so it's fine. But I met this person who has this motto, this like philosophy of unapologetically being yourself, And I was like, yeah, that's fucking cool. And I do believe that's what you were just talking about, is like, there's a question of, do you unapologetically be yourself, or do you withhold some of that so that you have more reach with more people? I've decided with this, I was like, yeah, I'm going to fucking do that. Be unapologetically myself. It just so happened that person who preaches that message was supposed to be on this podcast. I think probably saw my comfort with controversial subjects and my position concerning some of them, and then decided like that my version of being myself was not something she wanted to be around or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a bummer because I like everything else about her brand and like her philosophy. I think we probably have in common, except for maybe a few exceptions, but something about my being myself made her say, well, we're not compatible with as brands that can coexist with each other and that can collaborate or cross promote each other.
Yeah.
But like you were talking about, like that was for me a sacrifice I had to be willing to make in order to actually do what this podcast is supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So if that's the brand, is like talking about difficult things, then yeah, that's going to be. So I think people need to be more gracious with this, certainly on a personal level. I understand it gets messy when you're like trying to mix like brand and business.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't have that crossover. But like when it comes to like person to person, like I think people need to get a lot better about like being willing to have discussions and like talk about tough topics without like I've one thing that's like as I'm getting older, one thing I think way back to the beginning of the show we were talking is like I tend to be more like analytical and very logical. When I was younger, I wanted everything to be very like, packaged up and catered as like, here's this, here's this, here's this. And
Clean
I found,
borders.
yeah. So I found like as I get older, I'm seeing that more and more fit somewhere in the gradient. So, and I think you can have, like different things can be appropriate for one person, or it's correct for them to hold that view, and not maybe for I don't know if I'm talking about like in a religious sense. I think it's like at some point you have to have something that's true. Like
Yeah,
you
you
can't
have to have
like
lines
multiple
Yeah.
conflicting things cannot be true
Right.
at the same time, but you can see things from different perspectives, and there are some things that can be true for one person and not true for another. Yeah, it's like yeah, usually things probably exist somewhere in the gradient, and I think people need to get better about like being able to talk through stuff without getting angry.
I think so too.
I think
And-
there are absolutes and there's lines you have to draw, or you have to make a stand. Like I
Yeah.
believe a certain way, but I think there's a ton of room for diplomacy and nuance and empathy. Like,
That's
if you're empathetic, you can a lot of times you can sit down with somebody, have a good conversation, and find out what's the reasoning for their
usually
thought
people have
process.
more common ground and have a common goal. Usually if you just like you sit down and calm down, like talk it out, usually you can find you have more in common with somebody than you would think. That's not always true, but I think it is true a lot. But you use the word nuance. So that's the other thing. And like in the world of, tweets, which I think is like, I don't have a Twitter account. It's like 280 characters now, I think. So it's like in the world of tweets and like short form videos and TikToks, everything's about sound bites. Like politicians speak in like goofy little statements, hoping it goes viral. And it's like, that's just not a good way to have, like, that's not a good way to come to like a consensus as a society, is through like fast sound bites and like little snippets. So it's like, use the word
Absolutely.
nuance. It's like, I want to have, it's like make nuance great again, right? It's like
Yeah.
have discussions, arrive at conclusions, be willing to talk through things.
It's
And
no
like,
wonder
don't-
things are so chaotic, because we want to communicate in 3 paragraphs. But you think back the way diplomacy used to happen, people would spend 6 months in another
Yeah.
country over multiple long conversations
debates and-
figuring
Yeah.
each other out.
everything's just so fast
Yeah.
now. It's just chaotic.
It
I
sure
think
is
it's dangerous.
fast.
I think it's dangerous.
Have you guys ever like, I want to go back to this, so let's remember to go back to the sponsorship thing.
Yes.
But have you ever had major perspective shifts? Have you like changed your whole fucking worldview on an issue before?
Not a 180. I think I've moved more towards the middle.
Yeah.
If I have had like a 180, it'd be very short lived. It'd be like a little burst, maybe. It's like I've heard some of your story about like your opinions on like topics of religion. Kind of had, from what I understand, just like from the bits I've heard from the show, it's like you grew up in a more fundamental environment. You had a big shift where it's like you do you identify as an atheist at this point? Is that,
I don't go around saying it.
sorry if I wasn't supposed to.
Not at all. Not at all. I don't give one fuck.
Okay.
I don't like.
You started talking about like nihilism in like one of the recent episodes I was listening to. So that's so from like fundamentalist, like biblical, right, to like nihilism. That's a pretty.
I mean, and I
shift.
went full atheist too.
And it,
Yeah.
and it was over a long period of time, right? Now,
Yeah.
so it's like you jump from one to the other, and then you're maybe drifting back. It's like, I don't think I ever had like that big jump, but it's
Yeah.
like, politically, like we grew up, our parents are, conservative, politically conservative. And I grew up that way. I
Yeah.
was like in high school, I was very like, and now I'm like, I don't know if it's like some of my views have shifted. It's like, without getting into specifics, I don't know. It's like some of my views have shifted. Some of them haven't. I've just softened on them, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. I think like trying to empathize with the other side and stop seeing them as the villain. That's
Right.
really important, because like truthfully, if I have a position on something and I know what the opposite position is, like I can try, like I will try to understand it. And I think I can, like I can be like, I can see where you're coming from entirely. And I don't think most people do that. It's like, I can entirely see where you're coming from. I just happen to disagree.
Yep. That's a crucial skill.
Well, here's something that I've been thinking about. I just had a conversation a couple of days ago with somebody on this point. Is if you have an issue with another perspective, and you want to be absolute about it, you could lose the long war because you want to be absolute. But if you were to simply make an exception for 3 to 10% of your belief and say, okay, I can give a little ground on this, you can come to a common ground, I think, and make some progress. But a lot of people won't cave at all. But if you had that, I don't know, if you had the ability to make some, I don't know what the word is, but compromise. Really.
It's compromise a little bit, yeah. And a couple of thoughts. I was like, when I have conversations like this, like my brain is like a tree, like branching off. It's like,
get it.
And it's like I forget which branches I want to come back to. As far as like trying to see other perspectives thing. So it's like, for the majority of my time in college, I went to this small Bible school, and there was one professor in particular that I think made the whole time there worth it. So obviously everything is being taught from like a Christian perspective, like a biblical perspective. So that's kind of like the root of what we're talking about. But you can have like, there will be different ideas like within that context, not saying, yes Bible, no Bible, but it's like,
right.
I don't know how familiar from like back then. It's like, I'm trying to think of a general example of this. It's like you can have different like theological systems. Like there's something called dispensationalism that like, I don't know how much I want to get.
Talk about whatever, man.
But basically he could take an idea and say, here are the four ways that scholars look at this thing. And he will say, I personally hold number 4, and I will back that up in a moment. But first, I'm going to tell you the first 3 and why I disagree with them. Mm-hmm. And he would fairly like articulate what those other 3 positions held, but he'd be like, I don't hold to those for this reason, and here's why I hold this one. And he would make the case. Yeah. And I loved it. I didn't have many teachers that taught like that. And it was great. So it's like I think that's a proper way to approach things. And don't straw man it, right? Don't be like, this is what they think and it's ridiculous. It's like, absolutely. I think he would fairly, because he changed my mind on some stuff. It's like I would hear my position laid out and something that he rejected, and I'd be like, oh, okay, that.
I wish I knew exactly the right language for all this stuff. I don't know if it's behavioral psychology or if it's neuroscience or what, but what I notice. That skill that you're describing is incredibly important, and it was a big part of how I navigated the story that you were just kind of like retelling of mine. That's like, the way I saw it, I was like, okay, I've got a view that I think is absolutely 100% the right view, and everybody who doesn't have it is condemned. And then I shifted to a different view, and I was like, now I've got an actually 100% accurate view, and everybody else who doesn't have it is condemned. And I did that with like 2 or 3 different belief systems. And I was like, why do I keep doing this? Like, why do I keep latching onto these in a way that's so absolute and not nuanced and not like flexible? And that was where I landed and started to criticize that in itself, was like that style of believing things, and trying to challenge myself to, instead of do that, discover this different way, this way of existing with multiple different belief systems without being in conflict necessarily with myself, and not lying about what other people are. Like I used to be just really dishonest, I think, about like what religious people are. Like,
yeah, that's a form of straw man, right? Where it's like you're building them up to be something that they really aren't, so you can more easily tear it down.
Exactly.
So, and that's to nobody's benefit, right? It's
like,
it's
just dishonest.
If you disagree with something, like really, like you're passionately disagree with it, then like, if you think it's wrong, then you shouldn't need to make it weaker than it is to prove that it's wrong. It's like, show the world for like it is what it is, and then build a case like why that's not.
Make it as strong as you can, for that matter.
Yeah, because it's like, so if it's wrong, it's wrong. Like things that are truly wrong, you don't need to straw man them. It's like,
absolutely.
So all this being said, I want to be clear. Like, I don't I think the modern way of thinking is some form of like relativism, right? Where it's like your truth can be your truth and that's true for you. My truth is my truth. Again, I don't buy into that. I think there is a true thing somewhere. I might not have it. You might not have it. It might be a third option that we're not even talking about. I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's where my mind has shifted some, where I'm like, I have some percentage of the truth. And it's my goal throughout my entire life is to get closer and closer to that 100% of the truth. I don't think anybody can ever get there completely, but absolute truth does exist and it is out there somewhere. I don't buy into this idea of thinking where it's like there's no such thing as absolute truth. It all depends on your content. It's like something's true. So have you seen that thing where it's like the light is coming from 3 different directions and it's like there's a triangle on the wall, there's a circle on the other wall, and then on the floor it's like a square. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you seen this illustration of this?
I can grasp what you're talking about, and I think I know what you're talking about. I don't know if I've seen exactly that.
So so it's like you'll have the floor, like one wall and then a second wall, and there's like a different shape on it. And like, look, this is how truth is. Like this person says, look, the shape's a triangle.
Yep.
And it's like, that's true for them because that's their perspective. And then this person says, no, it's a square, and that's true for them because they see the square. But I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, you have some shape that's casting all the shadows. It's not that the square is true, the triangle is true. Those are all pieces of the truth.
Right.
But they're like each person is missing 66% of the equation. What's absolute truth is whatever that object is in the middle of the room casting those shadows. That's what we should all be trying to figure out together.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm not into the relative assumption either. In philosophical terms, it's hard, but in just like in practical terms, that's where I get the most frustrated with it because it's like we've taken it to a goofy place where like we can't agree on what any words symbolize anymore. Or, like it basically just the dramatic ones that kind of like make a difference or at least vilify people or not. It's like this word means this word means this, and there's little micro battles for like 12 of those words that keep us from being able to even like people on the right or left side of the spectrum being able to even like address a problem accurately because the words are so convoluted.
We can't even get to a major issue to have a conversation about because we can't agree on the little tiny thing at the start of the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be able to have a conversation, you have to have some level of agreement.
Yeah.
You have to have some consensus on something. And like language is a big part of that. It's like, what do words mean?
Language is the tool we use for that.
So if we can't agree on that, then like how are we going to have a conversation?
Yeah. And it doesn't like words themselves aren't objective. They're a symbol. They're a linguistic symbol, but like just accepting the nature that we have to try to at least agree with each other on what these words symbolize in reality, like what their physical embodiment is. Can we just agree on that so that we can understand whether or not we're describing the same thing? And I don't understand this weird. Thomas Sowell said something about the truth. Like that was what it was. It's something to the effect of the very concept of truth belonging to a person, to an individual, denies the concept itself. Like if something is true, it would have to be true for both you and I, for either of us to be able to conceptualize it as true. If you have your own truth and I have my own truth and it can't be shared, then the very definition of the word doesn't exist anymore. It can't be personal property, is what he said.
Yeah. So like that kind of, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, that's kind of what I was saying about that shape in the middle of the room. Like you have your context and your perspective. I think that's the word people use. It's like, well, that's true from my perspective. It's like you have your context and your perspective, and that's a piece of the truth. Maybe it might be none of the truth. You might have just made something up on your own. But it has to be shared. It can't. And like this is so basic, right? People like the topic of religion. People will be like, well, everybody's like, people want to believe in this some sort of relativism, where if you just believe something hard enough, like somehow it'll all work out. But like most religions are like exclusive of each other, right? It's like they can't like if your religion. Okay, so you have your thing and you say this is true, and it's open and it's all relative. Your truth, your truth can be your truth much. But if my religion says yours is a lie, like then that breaks down immediately. Can my religion still be true somehow? Like if it just rejects yours, how does that relationship work? It just
Right.
Well, you have Islam, Judaism, and Christianity immediately all contradicting each other. So
yeah, they all say
those,
like those are like monotheistic religions that believe in like one God and reject the others. So and then they say there's a God. So it's like if
and I think some Asian religions can coexist because they come down to
yeah, a lot
mindsets.
of Eastern religions it's about like self and like God is either within yourself or out there in everything, and there's not this like one entity that is true. So I think there can be crossover, but if you have like just saying there is a God and then saying, well, there is no God, like God doesn't exist at all, like those two things don't line up. They can't both be true. Like,
Have you ever looked into pragmatism, or did you ever hear any of the episodes where we talked about pragmatism?
no, so if I think I'm familiar with it as a concept pretty loose. I don't know as like if it's a like defined like school of thought or philosophy. I don't know.
So one definition of it, as far as it relates to belief, is something like pragmatism is rooted in that which produces life, or that which produces like flourishing.
Okay.
So then sometimes I think, these ideas that we might have about God, like statements about God, this is what's true about God, this is what's true about God. It's like the pragmatist view might be like if you're in an environment where like a bunch of religious people will hate you or murder you or kill you if you deny the existence of their God,
Yeah.
then the pragmatic thing to do would be to not do that so that you stay alive. That would be the truth that you're living out is that it's best to not make enemies of like masses of people that might want to murder you or whatever.
Yes.
So that's like the truth within that drama. It's not I think the way I understand pragmatism is it's not about our limited expressions of what we think is true. It's more about living in a way that doesn't result in your own demise.
Yeah, so that kind of goes back to what we were talking about, like saying things on the record, and as far as your business and your
That's
brand,
damn right.
it's
It
like
sure does.
so it's like I might believe something personally, but I'm not going to attach it to my business or my brand because it's not to my benefit. Not like you don't want to go through life like lying about who you are and what you think, but it's
Right.
like sometimes it's just like it's not useful.
Well,
Like,
it's tough. Yeah. I mean, I know musicians that believe I don't want to give people any reason to not like my music. And I feel very much different from that. And like I think other musicians that I admire do as well. They're not worried about those who
Yeah.
won't like it. They're worried about finding those who
Well,
will
yeah, that's
like
what
it.
we said. It's like if you say one thing that chases somebody away, you might just cause somebody to identify even more
Exactly.
with you and get a super fan
Well,
out of that. But
within reason, though.
within reason, like that is a hard line to walk, and I think I don't know how you develop that as a skill set to like know what the difference is, because you can certainly say something that just like is career ending and just shoot yourself in the foot.
See, here's an
And-
example you could make. For instance, I know people who have had exceptionally negative experiences surrounding alcohol. So based on those experiences, we could go out and be like, I am very, against alcohol. And that's all we could really harp on that.
Mhm.
And then we could get zero business with all these breweries in Winston because we're so anti-alcohol, even though like the thing is like, just because we've had a bad experience or we know somebody who had a bad experience doesn't mean we need to take that line and make it an extremely forefront thing in our business.
Mhm.
Even though in theory it could be a positive thing for some people, it would be in our better interest to not.
Is there a difference between like actively saying something that you don't believe to be true versus just keeping your mouth shut and just not choosing to not say something and be like, I'm going to keep this private. I'm going to keep this out of the public eye because it's.
I think there's a spectrum there too, but I think that I've heard it. One phrase I've heard on that I liked was that if you have something to say, silence is a lie. And I think I relate to that sometimes,
yeah.
but only sometimes. Like
Yeah.
sometimes it's best to. We always have to assess where we are in a certain situation. Like if I disagree with my boss at Aperture about something, and it's like, well, I made this video and you wanted it to be different, but I pictured it this way. she's the one that pays. She's the one that pays me, so it's cool to make that sacrifice and not like be too egotistical about it. But there are times where my ego is right, and like what I'm doing, what I'm serving is myself and my vision. And when I'm serving myself and my vision, I think it's right to say what I think.
Yeah.
It's just time and place.
So along with those lines, and this is where you might come to like an ethical dilemma down the road, or we might. But if you have something you feel ethically obligated to talk about, whatever it might be, if you achieve a large audience and you have the capability to reach what you could consider the masses, and you control influence, then you almost have this strange ethical dilemma of, do you cause that, you kind of sabotage yourself and be outspoken, or do you hold your tongue and maintain your larger audience?
Yeah.
And that's a tough conversation, because you were talking about somebody who did take, they took the higher road maybe and lost some of their audience members.
Yeah, I mean, my vote in recent history, I mean, when the Joe Rogan controversy was taking place, I thought he handled it correctly, which was to not he acknowledged
Which controversy specifically?
He's had the one where people no kidding. I guess the concept where people wanted him off of Spotify because of what he was talking about, and the argument was he's got a large enough platform that I think is justified that he shouldn't talk to people this way. Maybe that's fair. I could be wrong. All I know is I felt his maintaining. All I know is he was doing what he has always done, talking about what he always wanted to talk about. And I don't sign up to the idea that if the mass is upset and wants to take this powerful person down because they don't like what he's saying, that's a good idea. I think fuck that. And I liked that he stayed true to his course and kept having his conversations.
I think people should be free to speak their mind.
Yeah.
And
this is one of those things that I think I've approached the gradient a little bit more on, to be honest. Because I used to be like no censorship.
Yeah.
Whatsoever. But like in recent years, you have people saying, like, the example that's popping in my mind is like the whole thing with Kanye West recently. Right. Like, should he get to, like, come on, say this? Because I used to be just hard, like 100%, like no compromise. It's like, yes, he gets to speak, and the marketplace of ideas, so to speak, will decide his fate. And
see, people if I reject owned that platform, but I would say, if I was a platform owner, I would be like,
I wasn't even talking from that perspective. So it's like, yeah, if you own the platform, you are to some respect, you're responsible. And saying,
like, what we're thinking of Alex Jones or like YouTube.
Well, I'm saying like the platform, yeah. So like YouTube, Twitter, whatever. Okay. It's like, does the owner or the people who are controlling that platform have some level of responsibility in the consequences that come out of what people say?
Right.
But see, the thing is, I don't want to come across as judgmental, but I think there are some people who are more impressionable than others. Like some people,
for sure,
some people are thought leaders, some people are thought followers. And I think when I was younger, I used to have a lot more confidence in people being like independent thinkers, and I just don't know if that's true anymore. So if Kanye West is up there saying his crazy stuff, I'm like, he might be like not emboldening people who already thought that way, because that's, you're going to have crazies out there and they're like going to be like, yeah, I agree with him. But changing people's minds.
Yeah.
And he's a big enough figure that it's like, I don't know, should we let him say stuff like that?
Now, I don't want to be the conspiracy theorist, but when you have companies that get large enough where they're at a scale as large as some small countries. I mean, you have business that are absolutely enormous, and their influence spreads across the entire world. So you have businesses that essentially function as countries.
Yeah, their
their
revenue is bigger than.
So in a sense, and there has been, over time, people have talked about the fact that eventually perhaps corporations will run world governments to an extent because of their level of influence. So you can have the conversation of, are you having censorship? You call it a corporation, but in a sense, it's sort of a virtual government of sorts.
Yeah. I think I see your point, where it's like, because people say a defense, or some people say against free speech, and like free speech, the First Amendment protects you against the government, right? Not necessarily other individuals or companies. Like like the government can't go after you. If you say some crazy stuff in my house and I don't like it, I can tell you to leave my house.
Right.
That's not a violation of your First Amendment. But like the police won't come arrest you.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
it. So that's the difference. But to what you're saying is eventually these things grow to such high levels of power and influence. They like who has more power, the country or the
Right.
So
But like if somebody gets banned off Twitter, that's kind of like taking them out of what we consider right now an important public square.
Or all
Yeah.
six.
You know.
There's
especially when
businesses-
it's a public figure or like an official figure,
Yeah.
like Donald Trump getting kicked off of Twitter when he was a sitting president. It's like
That's a big deal.
that's a big deal. That's not to say whether or not I agree with him or disagree with him. I don't know if I
But I think it would be,
but like it is weird that like the president of the United States I understand is like he would say some inflammatory stuff, but still, like, the president of the United States was removed from the public square.
and that's
like
a
you're
good
saying.
example of what I'm talking about. These, in a way, these social media giants
Mhm.
supersede government.
Yeah.
Yep.
Isn't it bizarre though that you can remove influence from the president of the United States? You
Yes.
can remove some.
That's
of
what I'm saying. So they made it so
Yeah.
he was not able to.
Address the public.
And
He was
see,
not
I would
able
be
to
just
address
as
the
up-
public in the same way.
I would be just as upset if it was Biden.
Exactly.
If
Yeah.
that happened
Yeah,
to Biden,
that's
I
what
would
I'm
be-
saying. I don't want to get
yeah.
into it because I don't like.
Same.
It's not a political thing. It's just like
the principle underneath.
I think the biggest thing that's really hurting us right now is team politics. It seems like most people don't believe anything. They just believe what their team tells them to.
Yeah.
So like they'll get up. So back to the Kanye thing, I would see people like defending what he was doing and saying it's like he didn't say that. That's ridiculous. He didn't. I would send them a quote and be like, he did. Like he said it word for word. This is what he said, and they'd be trying to defend it because somewhere, somehow along the line, like Kanye got put on their team, so
Yeah.
they have to play the team. It's a team sport right now, and it's like, and that is so dangerous. And it's like it's nonsensical. This goes back to like the moving towards the gradient. It's like abandon the team and actually believe what you believe,
Yeah.
and back the guy who represents that, regardless of what whether they're red or blue or whatever. Just like back the guy who you actually agree with.
Well, you hinted at something that I think is true for a lot of people. That's like concern about other people's commitment to thinking like an individual. And I share that. I wish I could press a button and make more people think like an individual rather than a follower of sorts. But the question then is like, which principle do we want to operate based on? Do we want to operate on the principle that we assume the best for each individual and say, we have to trust that your path and your judgment is going to lead you to where you most want to be and respect the autonomy you have to do that? Or do we say you're a threat to your own autonomy, you're a threat to other people, like your lack of ability to like choose an intellectually thought through position is like it's too dangerous to allow you to express it or whatever.
Yeah.
And I just have to err on the side of like, I want to maximize everybody's autonomy.
Yes.
I don't want
Yes.
to take it away.
Ultimately-
the more you give that, the better at it people are going to be.
Yeah.
And the more you babysit people, the more childish I think people are going to be, and the more dangerous it is to let people.
Yeah.
That being said, the flip side of that is if you want to like restrict that and then you have to figure out, well, who gets the power to restrict
Yeah.
people. So
Which
I
is
think
a fucked up.
then that could take you down a really dangerous path. I think you have to err on the side of autonomy, like you say. Now, that being said, you're saying like just expect more and more people and they'll get better and better at it. I don't know if that's necessarily true either. I think a lot of this comes down to society and education and like what are we expecting
sure.
of people. And this
But that's
society,
what I'm saying. If you educate people with
Yes.
the mindset of these people are going to be self-sustaining in a sense,
yeah.
they can stand on their own. If you train people from the beginning with that in mind, I think they are going to be more capable of.
It comes down to like what do we expect of people in like their thinking, in their work. This comes down to entertainment, like what kind of stuff, like music, movies, like what images and thoughts are we filling our heads with. And unfortunately, like these shifts take a long, long time. I think an individual can change over the course of, months or years. Like society takes decades to shift. But just like the way, I don't know. Yeah, that's a big question. But it's like, I think people just generally think less. Just, we have so much to keep, our minds occupied with. It's like people don't read like they used to, because there's just like, that's all people had to do. They didn't have video games and just movies at their disposal and just endless TV to watch.
Yeah.
So it's like, what else are you going to do other than learn things? And now it's just, you don't learn, you just consume.
You know what's been causing me to do a lot of like heart searching lately? Casey and I are watching Survivor. And we're watching Survivor. And I'm like, I think it appears that everyone's actual like ethical buyout price is about $1 million apparently. Because I know it's just a game, but man, it's really weird watching people who, like, this one lady's like a Boy Scout guide or whatever. She wore a uniform, and it's like these people were like backstabbing in line. I know it's just a game, but man, it's crazy, because I'm thinking, like, if I went on there, like, dang, like these people are like looking at each other in the eyes. Like the one dude is like, I swear on my grandmother's grave that, like, I'm telling you something true. And his grandmother, he's like, yeah, my grandma's actually sitting back like watching Jerry Springer. She's fine.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, what would I do in that situation? You want to talk about like your ethics and how good they are. What would you do if you were on Survivor?
There's $1 million.
Yeah.
Tough.
How much does it take to get all that stuff to go out the window?
And in the public sphere too. You're literally on national TV, and it's cost $1 million. Like, just not even like you're getting $1 million, just the chance at $1 million, and you're willing to abandon all these very core, like, don't lie, don't steal.
Mm-hmm.
It's like out the window for the chance of $1 million.
Yep.
So really, like, we're not that grounded.
Yeah, no kidding.
Everything's very fragile.
Yeah, and that, it's like, I guess, like, survival. Like, it's survival, and people are, I guess, aren't in that great of a situation, so they're willing to grapple for it. So
survival is a powerful instinct.
Can you imagine how that would? I was thinking about the impact of being on that show for business. I was like, if you went on that show and people were like, I'm going to give you this money, and then you go on there and you play a really tough game and you trick everybody and you mislead everybody and you get out of there. It's like, I would honestly have trouble doing business with somebody after watching them, especially like you're watching one guy, he's like, oh, I got 5 kids to feed, I want to win this money. And then you got the dude who literally just got out of college, just throwing the dude under the bus. And I'm like, no. Like,
I wouldn't work with that guy.
That'd be tough.
Yeah.
Well, I'm with you, but to play devil's advocate, what if what you were looking for was you wanted your business to be, you're both nice guys and you're like, we need to become more competitive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What if the guy you had at your disposal was like the most ruthless, competitive, I don't give a fuck about being honest or whatever, I'm here to win. Does that guy offer you an advantage that you don't have already?
Yes.
Because you're too nice.
Yes.
I would be concerned of like what deal is he making with like a competitor? Is he going to play like the double agent game where he's going to like, I don't know.
But you're very right though.
I get what you're saying, but
okay, so now you have another one of these double-edged sword situations. So I could go in and be like, yeah, I'm going to be super ethical and I'm going to play a clean game. But let's say I have a kid and a wife at home and we need money, but I'm going to be clean and ethical, and that's what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, I neglect my ability to actually take care of my family properly, and I throw away my opportunity to buy my kid food and shoes. Mm-hmm. So I've done one good, but really wrong. Which one outweighs the other?
Yeah. Like
and it's a game.
Yeah.
It's a game, and other people, you don't know if they're going to be playing a clean game or not.
So far, the most vicious but wholesome thing I've seen on the show was the dude Rupert. He's got this big wily beard, tie-dye tank top, and the other team like brought their bucket of stuff up on the beach. Like, they're going to go out in this village and buy all this stuff. And everybody drags their stuff off the boat, puts it side by side, and then one team runs off and Rupert's just sitting there. And they left all their shoes and all their stuff. And he's looking at it. He's like, this is a game. I'm a pirate. And he's just like super, like, almost childish about it. He steals all their stuff. He takes their shoes, and he takes all their shoes and goes out in the village and trades it for food. But it was like, he had a good heart about it.
You said that was the most wholesome thing you've seen?
No, to really though, because in a way he's playing the game well, but at this, and he does something, but he doesn't have this kind of vicious mindset about it. Like he's like thinking about it. Like he's like, yeah, this is a game. Like they left their shoes. They shouldn't have left their shoes. He's like, we're on a pirate island. Literally, I'm gonna just be a pirate. And he took him, and he was laughing about it and smiling, and you could just tell it wasn't coming from a bad place. He had a good. There's other guys on there who were like, I don't care about this person whatsoever. I'm gonna get him out so I can get this money.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Like maybe it comes down to like your approach. Like
I think attitude is a huge part of it. Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, oh shit, I had a thought. What was it? Well, I think it was about attitude, ruthlessness, game playing. That's a thing, I guess, that I'm somewhere right around it. I think it's something just like sometimes to produce success, yes, our ethics have to get challenged, and maybe ethics are hard to maintain all the time, but success will often come at the expense. Like, I mean, think about sports, man. Sports are competitive in nature, and like ordinarily what you're taught ethically is that it's good to cooperate with other people's goals, but when you're playing basketball against somebody, you're absolutely trying to stop them from getting anything they want. You wouldn't do that normally in life, but in the context of that game, it's like the only appropriate thing to do. It'd be unethical to let all your teammates down by like not trying to take that role seriously.
Yeah.
This comes back to like, I think we have to live within a gradient, because we could be very like being black and white in things can actually make you cruel and unethical in other ways. Just like I said, I was talking about like neglecting your family by being too absolute with something.
Right. Yeah.
You have to figure that gradient out and do what's right to the best of your ability, but you can't be absolute.
I guess there's responsibilities that come with certain relationship dynamics, and like in other ones, you sacrifice certain ethical norms in the name of other, relationship responsibilities. And I guess I hadn't really thought about it exactly, but yeah, I guess that's usually true.
It's important to know, it's like in the context of basketball or Survivor, it's, it's a game. It is like a winner takes all. But in the context of like work or business, it's not. I think the way people phrase it is like it's not a zero-sum game. I think is what people say. It's like it's not like you get all of the pie or none of the pie. It's like generally, usually, there's enough for everybody to have. It's like you don't need all of it. You don't need to. Just because somebody else is winning doesn't mean you're losing. It is possible for two people to win in the real world. So it's like, you don't need to squish people to. It's like we're in the video and photography business. That's a big part of what we do, and there's plenty of video people and photography people in Winston, and it's like there's enough for everybody.
Yeah,
there's enough for everybody.
And with business deals, there's plenty of room for negotiation and talking to figure it out.
It's like there is definitely situations where it can be a win-win, like everybody, and that's like ultimately that's how business should be done. It's like everybody should come out of a negotiation or like enter a deal where it's like everybody feels like they won.
Yeah.
And not like they put something over on the other guy. It's like, oh yeah, we all like that's how business should be done. If we have a good product and we are doing something that is of value to somebody and they exchange money for that willingly and they're like, oh, you helped us out. That was fantastic. And we got money out of it. And they're like, that was fantastic. We loved it. That was great. Then it's like both parties win. Nobody put one over on the other. And it's like we both come out of this being like, good. We're happy about this.
Speaking of getting money out of people. So sponsorship.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were when we first broached
so
that subject.
Talking about like niche and who you're trying to reach, I want to ask you mentioned on one of your episodes you said something about like we're trying to get like let's get a sponsor on this thing.
Yeah, with the great controversy of the copywriting.
Okay, so I wanted to ask like what kind of sponsors are you going after for this show and why those people?
Good question. I've only approached probably 5 or 6 thus far. Each time I did, I said, I know that we're not at a scale that's like usually where people start to look for sponsorships. Like my audience is much smaller than what I would like to have to offer you. But if you would like to, sort of be a part of our story of progress, then you can be. I went for brands that I thought had, honestly, the common denominator was like North Carolina brands, because I felt like it was like, well, this podcast has sort of started out about the North Carolina community, the North Carolina art scene. So maybe I will think of it as a way to appeal to people who care about that sort of local support type of thing. So I went from local brands like Broad Branch Distillery and like I don't remember who else I reached out to downtown, but small independent
Gotcha.
small businesses like that. I reached out to like Wrangler and Cheerwine, like just and everything in between, just like large and small businesses to see if anybody would be interested in
Gotcha.
kind of playing that role.
Yeah. So that's you're thinking about it more than I think most people do. I think when you're talking about sponsorships and like looking to score something like that, I think you got to start lower with your show. Like not as far as who you're going after. I'm saying like a couple steps below that, as far as like before you get to that point, deciding who you're going to go after as a sponsorship.
Yeah.
So as far as like niching down and like who is your target audience? Like what is your audience made up of? And once you have that question answered, then you can say, okay, what kind of products and services would be beneficial to that audience, and then try to get sponsors off of that. So on our show, it's like we're not going after all of Winston.
Right.
We're going after the we're not even going after the established businesses in Winston. Like we're going after the people that want to grow their thing. Right. So either it's like a side hustle, it's not their full-time thing. They're very young in their journey, not young in age, but like young in their business owner journey. So what kind of services do those people need? They might need some help with bookkeeping. So it's like, let's try to get a bookkeeping service to sponsor the show. So we can say, hey, audience, who like we know who you are, so we can identify what you need. So who's the target audience of Red House? I know it's like generally like art-minded, like thinkers. It's a very broad show, right? So it's like you're talking about a lot of topics.
Yeah, one word that comes to mind is music enthusiasts, or like local music enthusiasts, you know? And then and I've also started to notice something about like the creatively curious, something like that. People who might be I want to put out a message that like, hey, do art. Choose art instead of politics is kind of the message. And so maybe that's a thing to build off of. Yeah,
so it's like I'm wondering what kind of services or, products, either local or not, like what would be beneficial to those people. So it's like if you're talking to creators, are you familiar with like Mixer Space?
Mixer
in downtown?
Space.
It's like, is that what it's called? It's Mixer. Is it Mixer Space or it's just called Mixer?
On Martin Luther, near the end of Liberty.
So it's like on the edge of downtown. It's just like they have like saws and pottery wheels and laser cutters. It's just a space for like creators, makers.
Cool place.
One of our friends spends a lot of time there.
I need to go check that out.
But it's a cool space.
I'm thinking of Duncan Music. There's repair shops all around. Like those would be beneficial people for.
So if you're like, okay, my audience is creators, people who make things, they're artists, then you can start thinking what businesses in town would be beneficial for my audience to know about. Mm-hmm. And you can set up some sort of deal and be like, let me send people your way. And I think once you figured that out and you kind of get that established, that increases your leverage when you're talking to the potential sponsors, because then the numbers don't matter as much, because it's not just people, but it's the people that those businesses want, right? Because your target audience is their target audience generally. So you create this symbiotic thing where it's like, and then there's different models you can do. Instead of it just being a flat subscription fee, you can create it so it's like lower risk for them. So like, hey, I only get paid if I can send you like a customer that converts. But
see, I'd like to talk with people surrounding Innovation Quarter, where you have a lot of these incubators and startups. And if we can find the people that are running and driving that forward, I would love to be a precursor to that for people. Like when they are just entertaining the thought of starting a business or preparing to quit their 9-to-5. It's long before they're going to be going and starting a startup and going to the incubators. But if we can find the people that are, essentially, I want to be the people that like kind of just that inkling of an idea, kick those people forward, and then they're going to go to the startup. Yes. So if we can find somebody who wants to sponsor our hodgepodge.
I
don't even know what it's called. Never mind. No, if we can get those people to put some money into what we're doing as an investment into people, that would be game changing.
Yeah. So like, I was listening to this this podcast. It's about like growing podcasts, and it's kind of meta, but he was like, he has his target audience, and he says it in every episode. He's like, this is the podcast for the the podcast entrepreneur who has already started and wants to grow and monetize his podcast. Like very, very specific. So it's like, I want to have my listeners, they need to have these 3 characteristics for me to be talking to them. So but he said, he's like, you might notice you don't fit all of those and you're still getting value from it. So I was listening to it. It's like, yeah, I have a podcast and I want to do it as an entrepreneur. I want to do it as a business venture, but I haven't started yet. Like, I'm just figuring out what I want to do. So I didn't fit one of his criteria. But I was still getting value from it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you reject people, like if they're listening and they partially fit the profile that you've built, but not entirely. You don't like throw them out. So if we're doing a business podcast about businesses in Winston, if we have a listener from like Virginia or Greensboro, we're not gonna be like, this show's not free. Like, you're not catering to them, but they're still gonna get value out of the show to some extent. And that might be where some of our advantage comes from in the context that Jacob's talking about, is like, we will have some sort of value to these incubators in Winston, because they're like, hey guys, we have reach outside of the city, and we're trying to frame Winston as this like hotspot of entrepreneurship and like this very business friendly city. If you partner with us, like, maybe we can pull people in and like, it can become this symbiotic thing.
I think Winston has something really unique, and we've been striking this conversation up a couple times with different guests. It's I feel like there's something special that is lingering from the Reynolds era, where you had these very wealthy benefactors who literally built a village up around their home, and it employed people. And I think there's a degree of inspiration that's happened, and maybe even been passed down through the generations. Kind of this unique situation.
Yeah.
And I think Winston is unique for that. So I don't know if that's actually like a psychological thing, or I don't know what you call it, geographical thing with Winston, where it's
Do you guys know about Flywheel?
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about like trying to get an office space down there and doing all that?
Yes. So Flywheel used to be down
they were
in the Innovation Quarter, and I went there a couple of times when they were down there, but now I know they're at the 500 West building. So we want to talk to some people over there and potentially talk to them about this sort of thing. So right now,
there's also Spark's
a new one. I think they've launched. So we are actually recording our show in a much smaller co-working space. It's very similar to Spark or Flywheel, but it's a business called Launch Tower, and they have an interesting model where their main business it's called a Lighthouse Small Business Solutions, and they provide like accounting services or bookkeeping, payroll services to small businesses. So they had the idea of opening like a co-working space, and then the packages that they sell, you get the office space, but then it pairs up with everything they do on the small business solution side. So they're a little more hands-on with the people in the space. So right now the podcast is being recorded in their space. So I'd love to talk to somebody at Flywheel, but I feel like at the moment that might be
the thing.
Might be a little conflict.
I was about to say, is Larry passing you like some side money to give him free plugs on podcasts?
No, he's not.
That was a
a
good plug.
Yeah, sorry.
See, that's
so fine. We've talked to them about like sponsoring the show.
And
I think they would do it if like we don't have like any signed paperwork with them. We'd be like, hey, if we bring you a client. But the thing is, it's just like, it's a really cool space, but like they don't have the capacity that like Flywheel. I think like if you went there and you open office space, I think it would be to your benefit.
I think it's a beautiful
because it'd be more
space.
hands-on. It's a great space. Like, it's been great for our podcast because like we're in the corner and you can see the Wells Fargo building out to the right window, and you see the Reynolds building and the Winston Tower.
That rooftop,
it looks nice.
That rooftop access.
It's like we've gone on top of the roof to film content. It's like, it's super cool.
You get to throw shit off the roof.
People.
I'm not going to admit to anything on record.
You should get your flame thing.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you say that. I actually asked the guys. I said it would be a great publicity stunt if I could put that up there and get a like 360-degree shot with the drone. And I won't throw anything
like Minas Tirith and Lord of the Rings. They had the trebuchets on the wall.
You know, it would be on the news. It would be great.
Yeah,
but might get in some trouble. Stunt.
But
fuck them.
Yeah, exactly. That thing has been so much fun. We've had clients come out to our office, and we have the trebuchet set up in the field above the office, and we've had them bring their families, and we'll take them out there, and the kids all get to pull the chain and throw 16-pound iron weights across the field and smash stuff. And it's a lot of fun.
Do you know somebody at Flywheel? Is that why you're asking?
Well, I went through the velocity accelerator that's
Okay.
like
Okay.
by some of the same people, you know.
Cool.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
it was in that building.
Nice.
And it's a very cool, like they're doing some cool shit
Yeah.
down there. I don't really understand all of it, but my temporary roommate, like he's
Mm-hmm.
in the mix with all that because he won our accelerator.
Nice.
So he is like got free office space in there for a little
Nice.
while, and he's
Very
working
cool.
out of there. And
Very cool.
anyway, it seems like positive vibes, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
think they like they're a little more. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't mind saying the wrong thing, but they're a little more. I don't think they have a ton of like creative creators in there. Like they have creative entrepreneurs in
I
there that
see,
are doing
yeah.
cool shit. I know that there's like a musician in there that
Yeah.
does some shit, but anyway, I don't think they have a podcast happening out there.
I'd like to talk to them and see what they would be open to, because
Yeah.
like either from like a sponsorship perspective, or if we could do the show up there. I don't know, because like I think we have a lease on the space that we're in currently, and that runs out eventually, you know, so it's like we will be moving at some point, or just re-upping the lease, not really sure.
Yeah.
But you know,
There's so much potential with the podcast.
there is. We don't want to limit ourselves just because of like where we started. We don't want to say, hey, we started here, so we're gonna stay here.
No need,
We have
yeah.
this relationship, so we're gonna maintain, like, stay with this relationship. And like those guys are great. Like we've made videos for them. We redid their website. So like they've been customers of ours. We've been customers of theirs. They do our payroll and our bookkeeping stuff. But it's like,
But if you look at the landscape of podcasts in Winston-Salem right now, there are a lot of podcasts already that talk about business. But I think the way we're going to be discussing business, the altruistic motives we have
Yeah.
behind it, I think the right person or right group is going to get behind this, and then really we're willing to go where the support is.
so
As long as it fits.
some of the other shows, they function more like a magazine. They say like, here's what's here, like here's what's going on in Winston. Like we want to say like,
Oh yeah,
here's how they did it. Like replicate what they're doing.
I'm with you on that, and
yeah.
that's part of the Red House thing
Yeah.
too. It's not so much about, I don't know, like I'm. It's about embracing what new media is and being more detailed,
Yeah.
than just being like, you put out a music, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I like that for sure.
Yeah. So that's it. So I'd definitely be. Actually, I'm going to. I don't know when this podcast is coming out. I don't want to date it too much, but it's like sometime next week. I'm going to be going to some community event at Flywheel that somebody invited me to. So
Cool.
we'll see who I bump into.
Cool.
Because it'd be incredible if like they either give us a space to get like semi permanently set up, because that's kind of what we're doing right now. We've attached like the sound panels and everything to the wall, or it's like our podcast setup can, like, it's really easily mobile. Like it can all pack into like a nice little crate with wheels on it, which is nice. So it's like if they just give us a space, you know, a couple times a month, and you know, we could pop up, do our little show, and then get out of their way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk to them, because I think there could be potential there. So
And I think we're very close to getting our sponsored drink.
Oh yeah.
Set up,
Hopefully,
which is
yeah.
going to be fun.
Well, congrats on that. I hope that works out.
I hope so.
And it's good. The good thing is it's really good beer, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to get
We'll see.
something figured out here too, and maybe I'll hit y'all up, text you, consult you, something.
yeah.
But I just I don't know. It hasn't been my top priority, but I do want to start thinking about sponsorship. It's been a
Yeah.
year now. I'd
Yeah, I
like
mean,
to get
that's-
something figured out.
Yeah, this stuff, it's not free. Like it takes time to produce this stuff. So, but like, I think the main thing, like any exchange of, I don't want to say the same word twice, but like any exchange of value, right? So if you're asking somebody, hey, send value my way, like in the form of compensation, in the form of money, it's like you got to be giving something back.
Yeah.
So if you have that audience that they want to reach, then they have a reason to do it. And
Yeah, I'd be really interested to know more about your audience analytics and their age demographic, how many of them are musicians, and figure that out. And that would really steer you in the right direction as far as figuring out who are we going to approach, who could we offer, or who could you offer value to.
yeah, there's two ways of doing that. Either you can say, here's who I want to reach. I'm going to start making my content around that person and start like pushing the needle that direction. Or you can look at your analytics and say, well, who's already here? I'm going to shift my content to. So with like Fort in the Woods is like the original audience was the kids, like the boys. It's like we want to go after kids in like the 10 to 15 age range, when they're old enough to go and do their own thing outside, but like they're not driving yet, so they're still like playing out. That was the original intention, was to like almost create like summer camp online.
Yeah.
That has shifted to now, like we're catering more towards the dads and saying, hey, here's activities you can do with your kids. Because that's like on YouTube, that's just who we had. It was like our demographic was like ages 24 to like 40 or something like that. And it's like, yeah, we don't have the kids, like, not even close. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see who you already have. Like,
yeah, I might have to do a little bit of reporting on that and see what because I haven't really paid attention to it for the last couple months. And I might ought to just check in on that.
And just watching your show as much as I have, I've already, gained some extra knowledge about and awareness of several different music venues in Winston.
Hell yeah.
So, I mean, I think there's something right there. I think if people are coming across your podcast and they're musicians and they're listening, it's like if I was a musician, I would already been like taking down notes because I'm like, okay, now I know who to call. It's like I'm going to be using this as a resource. I'm going to start listening to this
like
as a
maybe
resource
some of the
start playing.
Yeah,
some of the venues, like not like certainly like your mind goes to the big ones like Ramcat or whatever, but like if there's like bars or restaurants or like albums, CD stores or something that wants like live musicians in there, you could be like,
see, now I'm starting to think, okay, so now have every guy in town who ever has live music, every restaurant, like Bailey Power Plant is always having live musicians on. So that becomes a resource for your musician audience. So it's, I mean, you just, and then you're gonna become a resource.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
To make this more complicated than it needs to be, you could make a website with all the people looking for artists in Winston. You could be like, hey guys, go to theredhouse.com/venues that need artists.
Okay. So now
and pick your venue.
Well, hang on. So now you make
that's probably too far, but
no. He takes this and makes it actually. It's like a subscription. So he has a Patreon, and then he actually has it so anybody in town. So he has a curated list of artists that he has vouched for and knows are going to provide quality music. He has them on a list, and then he has a vendor list. So either can go on and mark themselves as active, and then the people in town with restaurants can mark themselves as searching, and then he will have a hub that controls the music scene.
You're gonna be the Uber of musicians,
the Uber
and live
of
music.
Winston-Salem music.
You're gonna be the guy who makes it happen.
I did once want to do something like that with a house concert website, and so like musicians who wanted to play house concerts and people who would host them ran into some things. People like the hosts didn't want their address on the website, shit like that. So kind of got abandoned. But yeah, I mean, I like those ideas a lot. I am trying to think about ways to diversify the way that Red House informs people about what's happening musically, and so I appreciate those thoughts for sure.
You could lean into it for sure. I will say this, like in that note, I have not, like, anybody you talk to who's in the music scene in Winston knows who you are. So it's like you might already be halfway there as far as like being the guy to help make it happen. It's like I know the artists, I know the venues, I can help bring y'all together, and if I can find a way to get compensated for it, then awesome. But we were talking to Tucker, and like your name came up. We interviewed Andy Tennille on our show a couple months back, and he mentioned your name, and I was like, I know who that is. It was like everybody who has anything to do with music like knows Tyler Nail at this point.
That's what I love about Winston-Salem. It's a small enough community that like there is a lot of that, and luckily I've been doing it for a long time here, so I do have a lot of those. But even when somebody new comes up, it's sort of easy to notice and be like, oh, who's that guy? Like this is the third time I've seen him post about playing at Ramcat, or third time I've seen Ramcat post about him, and kind of put that little world together, and it's fun.
I like that about Winston, and we've tuned into the same thing. It's just big enough you can kind of disappear if you want to, but if you do enough, you can gain some notoriety.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really fun.
Well, fellas, I feel like we covered everything there is. We covered a lot of good shit.
This was enjoyable. I like this a lot.
It was great to have y'all.
Thank you.
I appreciate the dog too,
dude. I can't believe.
I wish our podcast had a podcast.
She loved you. She was just like, "This is where I'm supposed to be."
Fell asleep on his lap, basically.
Funny thing is, so like my friend was here, and it just Marble there has never been allowed on the couch until today. And she had a friend come over, and it was just like too much chaos, 2 dogs, and I was like, I'm not gonna try to enforce the no dog on the couch thing. So she's just loving that. She got to make friends out of y'all. She's feeling blessed.
Cool. Taking advantage of the loosening of that rule for sure.
Yeah,
maybe we'll add that to our podcast. I want
a little wrinkly forehead. All that extra skin. I'm sorry. I
Thank you
woke
for
up.
sitting with me.
She's such a star. She really likes you, man.
Yeah,
Look at
she's
that.
cool.
She's in
cool.
love. Well, hey, thank you guys for
Yeah,
coming
for
out
sure.
here, and I guess like we're gonna collaborate more on podcasting, and then
Yeah, I want to have you on our show and talk more about. Yeah,
I'll be
like
glad
what you're-
to. And then
what
I
you're trying
mean,
to
I
do.
want to have y'all over here again. So
Let's do it.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah,
do
for
it.
sure.
Thank you so
Stay
much.
in touch, Yeah.
thank y'all for being here.
Yeah, thanks.